The ASUS PG27UCDM is a 27-inch 4K OLED monitor with a 240Hz refresh rate and full bandwidth DisplayPort 2.1, ticking all the right boxes on paper. But how does it actually perform? Well, the PG27UCDM uses a 4th generation QD OLED panel whose subpixels are more quadrilateral than diamond-shaped. Combined with the supremely high pixel density, any color fringing issues seen on earlier QD OLED monitors, especially around fine text, are now virtually imperceptible, even at 100% scaling, making the monitor a viable option for work and productivity tasks. As shown in the calibration report embedded within the user menu, each ASUS PG27UCDM is factory calibrated in the sRGB CAL mode using a Konica Minolta CA410 colorimeter. Indeed, sRGB CAL was the only picture preset that targeted the sRGB or Rec. 709 color space out of the box. Measured using a colorimetry research CR100 colorimeter profile to a CR250 spectroradiometer though, our review sample exhibited a somewhat red-tinted color temperature, causing the image on screen to appear warmer than reference. Thankfully, adjusting the red channel in the color temp user submenu by a few clicks was sufficient to level out the grayscale, bringing SDR color inaccuracies to below the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3 on this color checker SG chart where 140 patches were measured, which translated to accurate skin tones and colors in real-world SDR material. Among the available HDR picture presets, only Display HDR 400 True Black and Console HDR with Dynamic Brightness Boost disabled yielded accurate PQ-EOTF tracking. Engaging Dynamic Brightness Boost within the Console HDR mode resulted in significant overbrightening of the tone curve from around 20% video stimulus onward, producing an HDR picture that was inaccurate, much like the Gaming HDR and Cinema HDR presets where Dynamic Brightness Boost was permanently enabled and couldn't be turned off. In the interest of accuracy, which remains the guiding principle of this YouTube channel, let's focus our analysis on Console HDR with Dynamic Brightness Boost disabled and Display HDR 400 True Black. In Console HDR mode, peak brightness exceeded 1000 nits on a 3% window or smaller, while in Display HDR 400 True Black mode, peak brightness was capped at around 470 nits up to a 10% window size. However, Display HDR 400 True Black employed a more relaxed ABL or Automatic Brightness Limiter algorithm compared to Console HDR, even though both presets delivered similar full-screen luminance of approximately 260 nits. In practical terms, Console HDR was better at preserving specular highlight detail above 500 nits, whereas Display HDR 400 True Black appeared brighter in high APL scenes due to its less aggressive ABL. This trade-off seems to stem from limitations of the QD OLED panel supplied by Samsung Display, a characteristic we've observed consistently since the first QD OLED monitor launched in 2022. So ultimately, it's a matter of choosing which compromise you are more willing to live with. In either case, DCI-P3 color gamut coverage measured 99% in UV terms, whereas Rec. 2020 coverage was 80%, with the underlying spectral power distribution showing beautifully distinct red, green, and blue peaks indicative of quantum dot technology. Dolby Vision is supported, but only in the player-led low-latency variant. There's no automatic switching, so you will have to dive into the HDR format submenu to enable it manually when watching Dolby Vision content, and perhaps just as importantly, switch it back to HDR10 afterwards. Otherwise, the monitor will continue to apply low-latency Dolby Vision processing to HDR10 material, which may not deliver the intended picture quality. Frankly, it's more hassle than working out how much of a film was produced outside the USA for tariff reasons, so in the end, we just stuck with HDR10. The ASUS PG27UCDM benefited from absolutely pristine bright uniformity typical of QD OLED, manifesting no dirty screen effect or DSE, bending or color tinting even from extreme off-axis angles. Dark uniformity on our review unit looked average though, with some thin vertical streaks and edge vignetting visible on full field gray slides just above black. Native 10-bit gradation was top-notch, be it on this rotating quantization test pattern from the Spears and Munsell UHD HDR benchmark disc, the grey ramp pattern from the Display HDR app, or the red skies in the 4K Blu-ray of The Martian. While the headline refresh rate of the PG27UCDM was always going to be 240Hz, which should be a boon for high-end PC gamers, the monitor had no problem handling 24, 25, and 50 frames per second content at all, presenting smooth motion without any frame skipping or frame rate conversion judder. In terms of connectivity, the ASUS PG27UCDM covers all the essentials, providing a DisplayPort 2.1 socket with full 80 gigabits per second bandwidth, two HDMI 2.1 ports supporting the full 48 gigabits per second HDMI 2.1 and DSC specifications, as well as a USB-C DisplayPort with 90-watt power delivery. Input lag measured 14.5 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, dropping to under 5 milliseconds at 120 FPS. Of course, the ASUS PG27UCDM also supports 240Hz refresh rate from a 240 FPS source, which brings latency down even further to just 2.5 milliseconds, paving the way for incredibly responsive gameplay. In addition to reducing input lag, the combination of 240 FPS video signal paired with 240Hz screen refresh rate also resulted in very high motion clarity free of black smearing artifacts courtesy of OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time. The PG27UCDM supports the key VRR formats including AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync, delivering smooth gameplay without frame drops or tearing artifacts. VRR flicker remained unavoidable in a handful of VRR games, especially on static menus, but the frequency and intensity did not seem as obvious or bothersome as that observed on larger OLED TVs. Interestingly, while the PG27UCDM was able to reproduce full 444 chroma at 4K 60Hz, chroma resolution dropped to 422 when running at 4K 120 or 240Hz. Fortunately, thanks to the monitor's exceptionally high pixel density, any impact from this chroma subsampling was barely perceptible even on static text at 100% scaling, let alone during fast-paced gaming. For playing HDIG-compliant games, we recommend using the console HDR preset, which hard clips at the panel's peak brightness to enable source-based tone mapping. This allowed us to set max TML and max FFTML to 1100 nits in the HDR calibration app on the Xbox Series X, ensuring that HDIG-compliant titles are rendered with maximum impact without being subjected to double tone mapping. Now, game consoles like the Xbox Series X and the Sony PS5 are capped at 4K 120Hz, but one way to achieve motion clarity comparable to 240Hz is by enabling BFI or black frame insertion, labeled as ELMB or extremely low motion blur in the user menu. ELMB on the ASUS PG27UCDM is only available with a fixed 120 frames per second SDR video source. The OLED panel would still be refreshing at 240Hz, but a black frame would be inserted every alternate frame for a 120 FPS video source, amounting to 120 Hz BFI. When paired with OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time, engaging BFI for a 120 FPS video source resulted in a significant uplift in motion clarity, comparable to displaying a 240 FPS video signal sans BFI, all without the black streaking, double ghost images, or overshoot halos common to backlight strobing implementations on LCD-based monitors. Naturally, inserting a black frame every other frame would usually darken the picture, but ASUS has cleverly designed the ELMB function on the PG27UCDM so that the brightness setting automatically increases to the maximum value of 100 when engaged, helping to compensate for the loss in luminance to make sure that users won't perceive any sizable drop in overall light output. And because it's 120Hz BFI, we did not notice any increase in flicker, unlike with the 60Hz BFI found on OLED televisions since 2022. Note that activating ELMB on the ASUS PG27UCDM would disable several key features including VRR, HDR, and aspect control. since it's technically challenging to insert a full black frame when the refresh rate is constantly fluctuating, and if BFI was applied during HDR playback, the peak brightness would drop drastically and the HDR10 EOTF would undertrack the ST2084PQ standard, so we completely understand ASUS' decision to restrict its eLMB functionality to SDR content only. Just to be absolutely clear, BFI on the PG27UCDM is a helpful tool for improving motion clarity if your system can't push beyond 120Hz at a decent resolution. However, if you are running a cutting-edge PC, you are far better off simply feeding the monitor a 240 frames per second video signal to take full advantage of HDR, VRR, and the lowest latency. ASUS has implemented a comprehensive array of anti-screen burn measures on the PG27UCDM, ranging from various auto-dimming controls and pixel cleaning composition cycles to pixel shifting and logo luminance adjustment to mitigate permanent OLED burn-in. Similar to most OLED monitors we've tested, there is some over-provisioning of pixels beyond the 3840x2160 UHD resolution, such that pixel shifting will never cause the edges of the picture to be cropped off however slightly. ASUS has also added a new proximity sensor that turns off the screen when no one is detected nearby, a smart idea for reducing the risk of burn-in. Talking of which, ASUS has been generous enough to include a 3-year warranty that covers OLED burn-in with the monitor. Like all QD OLED displays, the screen would turn grey when hit by direct light due to the absence of a polarizer, so careful positioning of the monitor is critical to prevent a noticeable loss of ambient contrast in a well-lit environment. Let's sum up. The ASUS PG27UCDM is a fantastic product that makes a strong case as a potential holy grail gaming monitor, thanks to its impressive specifications: a compact 27-inch screen with UHD resolution, 240Hz refresh rate, full bandwidth 80 gigabits per second DisplayPort 2.1, not to mention all the hallmark advantages of OLED technology: true blacks, vibrant colors, wide viewing angles, and a sleek ultra-slim design. Beyond its outstanding hardware specifications on paper, the monitor also delivers clean and smooth motion without artifacts, exemplary native 10-bit gradation, as well as accurate colors and PQ EOTF tracking when using the right picture presets. And so, the ASUS PG27UCDM earns our highly recommended award. Of course, no monitor is without its flaws. The lack of Dolby Vision auto switching and a rather restrictive ABL in its 1000 nit HDR mode are things we would like to see improved. But these are relatively minor shortcomings in the grand scheme of things, because overall, this is a fabulous gaming monitor that holds its own for work and productivity purposes too. If you're interested in winning an ASUS ROG OLED monitor including the PG27UCDM, the company is currently running a giveaway campaign. To take part, simply create a piece of content, a photo, meme, or AI-generated image that shows why an ROG OLED monitor stands out. Post it on your preferred social media platform, tag at ASUS ROG using the hashtag upgrade to ROG OLED, and one winner will be selected each month to receive an ROG OLED monitor. For more information and full entry details, please click the link in the YouTube description below. I look forward to seeing your creation in the gallery. Now, despite the 240Hz refresh rate on the ASUS PG27UCDM, some of you believe that a 360 or even 480Hz LED LCD monitor will perform even better. But you're wrong, because OLED's motion advantage over LED LCD goes beyond mere refresh rate figures, as I've demonstrated in this OLED versus LCD side-by-side comparison you can watch by clicking here.